Okay, today
We're making
okay today
we're making my style of Jamaican chicken soup. Um, so if you pay attention, you'll be able to um, follow the instructions and get the same results I get. I use some special ingredients. I used to cook with the dried cock soup mix, but wanting to go a little bit more natural, I started using different ingredients. So stay tuned and I'll show you some of the things I
here
use.
are the dried ingredients that I use in my chicken soup. Of course, I use garlic powder. I use paprika. I use salt. And I use this spice I got from Jamaica. It's a blend of spices that I got from Jamaica. Can't tell you exactly what is in it. And I also put in pimento, which is otherwise known as Jamaican allspice. Looking in the pot, I'm using, I think this is an 8-quart pot. And if you notice the different spices in the amounts, I don't really have a set measurement. I go by sight. And with the garlic powder, I'd say that's about 2 tablespoons. I do about the same, or tablespoon and a half of paprika, about 2 tablespoons of salt, and another tablespoon and a half of that Jamaican spice. Now this spice is not necessary. I only added it since I got it from Jamaica. So if you don't have it, you can add other spices that you think you might like. One of my secret spices is anise. The actual anise leaves, or it's more like a bark, but these are the actual flower that comes from the anise tree. Now the spice, it smells like licorice, and you want to be careful not to use too much. For this pot of soup, I'll just use one of the star anise, and I'll show you what that is when. So this is what I'll be using in this pot of soup. And the star anise you can get I got it at the Chinese supermarket. There's also another spice called the Chinese 5-spice, which is another substitute you can use for this orange spice that I have here, but you can't use too much because it's very strong. Again, it has that licorice smell to it. Now I'm going to be seasoning the chicken. I'm going to again use all the dry spices and a couple extra spices that I've used. Couple extra spices that I'll be adding to the chicken. Some people, they don't necessarily season their chicken. I find that the soup comes out better when you season the chicken. I'm using basically boneless chicken thighs, boneless and skinless. And what I'll do with this is I'll open it and still take off most of the fat that's there, cut it into smaller pieces, and this will be seasoned with, again, with some of the seasonings I showed you before, and a secret, my secret seasoning, which is my all-rounder, It is ABC sweet soy sauce. So that's what makes my soup a little bit different. And my cooking really, because I use this on all my meats. And it's, you know, you should try it. It's very unique. As far as the vegetables are concerned, again, potatoes, and this is what they call an acorn squash. I started using this thinking it was a pumpkin, and since I wanted to substitute something for the cock soup, which had monosodium glutamate and things like that, I went to the supermarket thinking I was picking up a pumpkin, and didn't realize what it was until I opened it and realized it wasn't a pumpkin. No, it's part of the pumpkin family. The squash. This is called an acorn squash, and this gives your soup a rich texture and a very good flavor. Now you have to boil this for about an hour and 15 minutes, 20 minutes after you cut it up and dice it. So you boil this first, and I'll show you that in a little bit. So now I'm going to start cutting up the chicken, and I use two types of cleavers. This one is mainly used for slicing both meat and vegetable. I don't use it for chopping bone, because the blade of it is thin and it isn't meant for chopping bone. So what I do now, I start by cutting the meat and cutting off some of the fat. Trimming that away. And this I slice in 2 or 3 pieces. And I will continue with this, discarding most of the fat where I can. This thing might need a little sharpening, but you get the idea. You won't be able to get off all the fat, but you want to get off most of it so that you don't have that oily residue on your chicken soup. You're still going to get some of that. Again, I'm slicing it small, instead of having big chunks. You can have smaller pieces, smaller bites for your soup. Now, what you can also do is, this will make more than just soup. I usually put, depends on the size of the pot, put most of the meat in the soup. But you also can cut this up and have some for curry. You can cut it in larger pieces and do jerk season. That's another video for you, because I have a unique way of making the jerk chicken. And my jerk chicken is done in the oven, not on a grill. And the reason for that is that I don't have a grill. and I had to improvise to figure it out. But I tell you something, uh, by trying different seasonings, I came up with a very good recipe, which I know a lot of folks enjoy. I get compliments on it all the time. And the next time I make a video, next time I do jerk chicken, I'll record that video so that you can see. And it's very simple, it doesn't take much time. So now, here's the chicken after it's been cut up, and took most of the fat off. You won't be able to get all of it out. I rinsed it off. You can use vinegar or lime to wash it. So that's about the amount you'll get from that package I just showed you earlier. The seasoning, I'm gonna go again and use some of the same dried seasoning that I used before. This time, not as much salt, because remember, you added salt already to the pot right there. So now I'm going to get some garlic powder, and it's again just enough to cover the meat like that. The next thing I'm going to get is the paprika, or paprika, I don't know how you pronounce it. And again, just enough to cover the meat there. And that will be good. So I'm going to add a little bit of the Jamaican spices, allspice. This is a mixture that was bought in the Carnation Market in Kingston, Jamaica. But it's been a year since I've had this. It's still pretty good. And again, you're not adding too much because it was added in the pot. You want to call it my secret ingredient for all or most of my meats. It's like a base seasoning I use. It's the ABC sweet soy sauce, and you want to pour enough to cover the entire meat here. Again, some people don't season their meat, they just cut the chicken and put it in the pot. So the chicken comes out bland and not tasteful. So now this is what it looks like before I mix it all together. So you mixing all the ingredients together here. And this should be done at least 30 minutes before putting it into the pot of soup to allow it to soak in and get that flavor. What you have to do is to make sure you wash your cutting board. And not just wash, you're using hot water. And what I do after I get most of the flesh off, the meat or fat off of it, is I'll put on a little dish washing liquid and rub it into the board. You want to make sure you get all of that fat chicken parts off the board, because you can get salmonella disease from leaving it. So it has to be washed properly, again with hot water. Because this now I'll use the board again, but on the opposite side for cutting my vegetables. Let me show you the amount of water I use in this pot here. So it comes up to about 3/4 of the pot. And again, I don't have a set amount by measurement. I always go by just judging by eye. Judy, my wife, doesn't understand why I use such a small pot with so much liquid. But it started out basically by me just testing, and since when it came out right, I just remembered the portions I put in and repeated it. So I haven't gotten the opportunity to actually measure the quantities, but yeah, this is about where I get the liquid to, and then you want to make sure you stir all the ingredients in as much as you can. Looks a little red. The soup, when it's finished, has a slight orange pumpkin color to it, and that's because of the combination of the paprika and garlic powder. So now I'm going to turn the fire on high. It's not actually, it's an electric stove. The stove we had before was a gas stove, which I preferred. But anyway, turn it on and high because, well, I tell you what, since I haven't cut up my squash as yet, I'm going to turn it down to have the water and seasoning warm up a little bit. But once the squash goes in, you want to bring it to a boil and have it boil the acorn squash for about at least an hour and 15 minutes before you start adding any other ingredients. So now I'm going to be cutting up the vegetables, starting with the squash, acorn squash, and the reason is obvious. The way the name is shaped like an acorn. I've tried this a couple of ways. I've tried it with the skin on, boiling it and dicing it and putting it in with the skin. But the problem with that was that it wasn't consistent. Some of the ones I got, the skin was very hard. Some comes and they're soft. So for consistency, I decided just to go ahead and peel the skin. And I'll show you how I cut this up in just a minute. So after washing your cleaver thoroughly with hot water and soap, then this is how I start on the, I usually cut off the back section. And then I cut off the little portion of the top. That way you can have it flat and you can start to cut it. So I start out by cutting it in half. Then in quarters. Then in eighths. Alright, so you do that until you get to about this size, and then I'll show you how I get it down from there. Okay, so now as you can see, I have, basically rough cut it like this, and I'll show you how I get it down to the size I want. So after using the cleaver, I will then start with a knife to start peeling. Alright, and you want to get the seeds out. And notice I come across the back like this straight, because there's a hard section here that I get rid of. It's like a core. Then I peel the back, the skin off. Sometimes it's hard to get into the areas here, into the grooves, but do your best. And basically here, and then what I do, I usually use a cleaver for this, but just to show you the sizes, how I cut it. And so that's the size basically you want to get for all of the squash. So what you can do with some of the larger pieces like this, what I normally do, I cut this in half again and then slice it like this. So this is what the squash looks like once you're finished dicing. Then just rinse in some cold water. Rinse them off. Once it drains, what we're going to do is come over now, turn the pot on high. So that we can bring this to a boil. And once it comes to a boil, then we'll add the next thing I prepare is the potatoes. Usually I only use, for this size pot, 3 large potatoes. These are russet potatoes. I usually try to get the organic russet potatoes, but the supermarkets I've been going to recently, I haven't been able to find the organic. So you just rinse off the skin. Of these potatoes. And then what I do, I just cut them in half so I can peel them easier. These again I will dice into smaller pieces. And when I'm finished with that, then I'll show you what it looks like. Okay, so the potatoes are peeled. They have not been diced yet, but I just realized that I don't have any carrots. So I'm going to have to go to the supermarket. When I'm back from the supermarket, I got my carrots, organic whole carrots. One thing I forgot to add was the pepper to the pot. Now normally I prefer using Scotch bonnet, but I have no Scotch bonnet, so I'm using a habanero. The water now is getting to where it's going to start boiling, so I'm going to add my acorn squash, which has been peeled, diced. Again, we want to make sure we boil this for about an hour and 15 minutes. You want to get it to the point where it starts looking translucent, or a little, the color starts washing out a little bit. And I'll show you that stage when we get to it. Now I'm going to I'm going to dice the potatoes. I've already peeled them, and I'll show you how I do my potatoes, how I dice them. I basically cut it in half, then cut it down to where you have these two slices. Then I do 3 other slices like that, other cuts, and then now you can cut and dice the way you prefer. I just found this to be more convenient for me. Some people like small pieces of potato or food. Other people like larger sections or larger portions of food in their soup. So you cut and dice as you see fit. I'm just showing you the way I do mine, and I just do it. It gets to the point where, you know, it's habit. So I can go through and dice these within a few minutes. And pot was boiling over just now, so I kind of lift the lid. Matter of fact, I think I'm going to take the lid off and let it boil. Now, you may need to add some more water after the hour, after boiling the squash for an hour. You may need to add some more water, because then again, you will, the liquid itself will become thick if it doesn't have enough water. So maybe another cup and a half, 2 cups, you probably need to add once the acorn squash has been cooked to where you want it. So here are the potatoes that are diced. You know, again, these are 3 large russet potatoes. You can use Irish. I find the russet potatoes are larger, and you know, I really can't tell the difference in taste between the russet and the Irish potatoes. The Irish potatoes is probably going to cost you a little bit more money per pound, but that's it. Now the next thing will be carrots, and my soup is very simple. All I have in it is the acorn squash, the potatoes, and the carrots. Simple but very tasty, believe me. And with the seasonings that I mentioned earlier, you'll love this soup. Just try it once. So now I'm going to be preparing the carrots. And I might not need all of these. I'll probably use 7 of the carrots here. So I go ahead and peel off the top layer of the skin, not very deep into the carrot, but just enough to get the top layer off. And once I'll show you how I dice it when I'm finished with all of the carrots, with all the peeling of the carrots. So now I'm going to be dicing or slicing the carrots. So I usually take off the tip, the ends, and you know, it's not anything about dicing or slicing. You can do it whichever way you want. I just like to give mine a little style and cut it at an angle. So it's just a matter of presentation. So that's the way I do my carrots. The one thing I want to remind you as you go along is that you need to stir the pot to get that, because what's going to happen is as the acorn squash begins to boil out, you're going to get this crust or this residue along the side of the pot. Now, as far as the pepper is concerned, some people are not into spicy food that much, but the trick to this is not to allow the pepper to burst. It will eventually shrink and shrivel, which will get the flavor of the pepper out without it becoming too spicy or too hot. The seeds are what carries most of the heat in a pepper. So that's why you can allow it to shrivel but not burst. Once it shrivels down, then you want to take it out. Carrots are done, and you notice that I have the carrots mixed on top with the potatoes. The reason for this is because I'm going to add both the carrots and the potatoes together. They cook about the same time, whereas the acorn squash takes a little longer to boil, so that's why that is the first to go in the pot. So now with the carrots, you go ahead and give it another rinse with the potatoes. And mix it in, and then let it drain. As you can see, the acorn squash is boiled down. Remember, we need to kind of get some of this off the side of the pot. That's part of the acorn squash after it boils down. And you basically can see the texture now of the squash. Now is when you can add the other ingredients. We're going to put in the chicken and the carrots and potatoes. So let me get the chicken here. So we're going to add chicken and get as much of this seasoning out of the pot. Stir that a little bit. It's possible that I might have to transfer this to a bigger pot. So let me do that and I'll get back with showing you how to complete. Now that we have transferred it to a bigger pot, as you can see here, I'm going to add the carrots and the potatoes and stir it a little bit. Normally I'd have, and when you stir, be careful not to break the pepper. Normally I would also add some dried thyme, but I think I'm out of time. So that's it. So we're going to have this brick come to a boil again for another 20 minutes, 25 minutes, and then I'll add the last ingredient, which is the noodles. Find the thyme. This is the last of it, so just going to add it to the pot. And that should be enough for this pot here. Just remember, once the soup is finished, to take out the stalks of the thyme, and also the pimento, so that nobody eats it by mistake. The pimento seeds. Alright, so now you can see the texture of the soup is coming to it's a little thicker. So I'm going to add a little bit more water to this, because once I add the noodles, it's going to get even thicker. So let's stir this around. Now you notice, let me show you the pepper starting to shrivel. Now for me, I can allow it to burst with this amount of water. It's not going to be, overpowering. It will be spicy but not overpowering. So you might want to taste it at this point for you if you're not into a lot of spice. But for me, I'm going to leave it there without having it break. And then now I'm going to add the noodles once it comes back to a boil. So now at this point, you can turn the stove down to around medium and add your noodles. Again, this is going to be, your noodles are going to be your personal preference. But I've used spaghetti before, I've used egg noodles, and recently I've been using linguine. Now, with the spaghetti and with the egg noodles, I basically break it in about 1-inch strips, like this. And for the size of this pot, I use about 3/4 of the box of linguine. So you see the size. And this is the last step, basically, before it is ready. And I can tell you, not because I'm Chef Manordi, but it's a very nice flavor soup. And I give it, there's a couple of things I give it credit that gives it that flavor. Number one, the acorn squash for sure has something to do with it. Number two, the anise. And number three,
the ABC sweet soy sauce. So that's what creates my unique flavor. You know, I call it my jam down chicken soup. Jam down referring to Jamaican. Even though in a true Jamaican soup you'd have more food types like yam, potato. They'd have a little dumpling in here. You know, they'd mix flour and water together and roll it into a ball, or maybe what we call spinners, and add it to the soup. But I'm not too much into having a lot of food, so carrots and potatoes are basically my my portion in the soup. So let's add some more noodles. I think I may have to add a little bit more water to this. And the reason is it looks like it's thickening up, but that's not a problem because this is going to last me a few days. And each time you warm it up, you definitely will have to add some more water. So I'm going to taste this now. I'll definitely wash the spoon. The taste is pretty good. At this point, you decide whether or not you need to add any more of the ABC sweet soy sauce. The way it is there now, it tastes pretty good to the point where I normally have it. So I'm going to let it simmer for another 10 minutes for the noodles to then cook properly, and that will be it. Okay, the soup is done now, and I am gonna have my bowl. So I wish you were here to enjoy some of the nice aroma of the chicken soup that I'm smelling right now. I'm about to have. But follow the instructions. If you have any questions, you have my email. You can drop me an email. Okay, bye.